It was 75 years ago when the most famous closing of all time was uttered. That's all, folks. And ever since then, presenters and speakers have been ending their presentation that exact same way. That's all, folks, and slap their thigh and just not know what to do and not know how to end. If you've ever ended a presentation, you've ever gotten to the conclusion and you're just like, it's over, folks, and they don't know it's over, we're going to show you a way to close on a high note. Just like opening to grab their attention, we want to close with something strong because this just might be the very last thing they remember. The entire presentation could get trumped with a message. What I wouldn't want it to be is, that's all. I wouldn't want it to be, are there any questions? And then there's no questions. Or, are there any questions? And then the question comes and it's a doozy. And I don't know how to answer it. And then I said, that's all, folks, and that's all we got. And so what are you going to remember for the whole presentation? How awkwardly it ended. The speaker didn't know what they were talking about, and the whole presentation gets trumped with that final close. So just like opening with a formula, kaba, we have a formula to close. Why do we do the bookends? Why do we teach formulas for the bookends? Because we found in the first couple of minutes of our presentation, people struggle. That's where I'm nervous. That's where I'm not sure how to start. I'm not sure how to open it. I don't know how to do that. So let's give you a formula for it. At the end, when you're finished, let's give them something to wrap up with so that they've got those nice bookends for their presentation. What we found is that the body of the presentation, that's the stuff you know. Now, we want to structure it like Russ covered in that last topic. We want to make sure there's flow to it. We want to make sure that there's structure to it so that we know what the landmarks are as the bus passes by. But at the very end, we want to wrap it all up, and we want to leave them with our final thoughts so that they take away what we want them to take away from the presentation. So what's that formula look like? It's called MAS. Now, if you're a Spanish speaker, what does MAS mean in Spanish? More. It's kind of like I want to leave my audience wanting more. I don't ever want my audience saying, I can't wait for this to be over. We need to finish speaking before our audience finishes listening. And this is going to be a great way to tie it all together. Here's the formula. 3 pieces. Guess what order they need to be in? Any order. Just like kaba. Any order. Doesn't matter what order we put them in. We want these 3 ingredients to be in our close. As a general rule, as we try to think about how we put presentations together, when I'm getting a 10-minute presentation or a 30-minute presentation or a 2-hour-long presentation, the ending and the beginning, the length of those presentations will depend. I say 5 to 10% of my overall presentation should be how much time I spend to close and how much time I spend to open. So my bookend should be about 5 to 10%. So if I have a 30-minute presentation, how long is my close going to be? About? Everybody's like, I didn't know we were doing math today. But 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. So we want to think about 30 minutes, 2 minutes at the end to wrap everything up. And we want to leave them with something memorable. Now, memorable is a lot like what ingredient from kaba? The kaba formula. What do you think memorable is very similar to? The attention. So here's a test. What were those 4 ways that we grab our audience's attention in the beginning? We can use a quote. We might use a story, a statistic, or a question. You could even leave your audience with that question, which would lead right into the final piece, which is the summary. You might talk about what are you going to do differently based on what we talked about today, which was how to prepare a presentation by knowing your purpose and your audience, developing your presentation by having an opening, a structured body, and a close, and then delivering your presentation with a visual, vocal, verbal alignment. What are you going to do differently as a result of learning this information? You leave them with a question. You leave them with a story. You might even have what we call a bookend story where you start a presentation with a story. Weave components of that story throughout the presentation and then wrap it all up at the end, giving them that final thought. giving them the rest of the story. You familiar with that quote? Who said that? Paul Harvey, right? Famous line, the rest of the story. You might end with the ending of that story after you started at the beginning. Great way to bookend it. Been around for a long time. These are different techniques that you can use. So when you think about putting the pieces together, you want it to be memorable. You want a call to action. Something in that close that is going to get that audience doing something with that information. We don't just show up and say, here's the information, good luck. We want them to do something. We want you to buy from us. We want you to think about this information. We want you to use this information. I need you to call me. What's the call to action that's going to happen in that close? It could simply be next steps. And then the summary pulls it all back together as we hit the highlights of what it is that we've covered with them. When you put all these pieces together, you are no longer leaving the audience with a sigh of relief. Whew, so glad that's over. But instead, you might be leaving your audience with a corporate ovation. Thanks.